Welcome to Women Pilots with Pat Gregory and Louise Mateos. They will talk about some history and adventures of women pilots, about their organization, Santa Clara Valley 99s, and what it takes to become a pilot. Welcome, Pat and Louise.
Thank you very much. So delighted to be here. I'm Pat Gregory, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I got to this point where I am a pilot and what my journey has been like and what sort of things I do as a pilot. Actually, this started, you have to go way back, when I was a child jumping off the garage roof in my backyard. I liked being in the air. And at one point, later in my life, I did actually do some skydiving and made about 400 skydives at one point. When I was finished with that, I realized that I really wanted to stay in the air. So I found myself, I used to go to the Reno Air Races, which is a huge international race where people come from all over the world, like 250,000 people. They come and they watch old World War II airplanes and other kinds of planes race around a course. And I used to go and watch and look at the planes and that. And so I found a lady there who I really connected with, and she became my flight instructor. Her name was Deborah Cunningham. And she became my flight instructor, and she taught me how to fly. So we started taking flying lessons. It was, I was living here in California, and it was in November. And we were using San Jose International Airport, was the place where the airplanes were. So I was renting a plane out of San Jose International Airport, and we started flying, and she started teaching me. Well, in November, the weather is not great. Most of my flying was just take off, come back around and land, take off, come back around and land. I had about 200 landings before I got my pilot's license because the weather was not sufficient for me to be able to go anywhere at that point in my training. So I learned how to fly an airplane, and I started out in what's called a Cessna 172, which is a small high-wing airplane with 4 seats in it. And I flew that plane for quite a while. I actually started my lessons, got my pilot's license. Now, how to get a pilot's license? I went to ground school first. There's a ground school where you learn all the rules of flying and what it takes, and all about the airspace and about the weather and about the airplane and the instruments and how it flies and everything. And you go to classes every week. It's just like any other subject, and you take tests. And when you pass your ground school test, so not everybody starts with ground school. Some people start by flying and then go to ground school. I started out ground school and then started my flying. And then I did the flying portion of it with my instructor, and we learned how to take off in the airplane, how to land the airplane, how to maintain the airplane somewhat, check to make sure everything was okay before I flew, and how to navigate to other airports and find the airports and land there and talk to controllers who, not every airport has a controller. Many airports, particularly out in the country, in the non not civilized, but the areas that don't have a lot of people and houses and stuff, you learn how to talk to the controllers and how to fly your airplane when there is no controller. And many airports do not have controllers in a control tower, but there are still rules, and you learn what the rules are at those places. And then once you do that, you take a flying test with a certified instructor who the FAA assigns certification to be able to qualify you to be a pilot. And when you pass that test, they have you do all the things in flying: how to take off, how to land, how to do a landing if the field is very short, how to do a landing if the field is very wet, if it's soft, how to avoid other traffic, how to do a traffic pattern, how to turn the plane in certain ways. You even have learned how to stall the plane. A lot of people think if you stall the plane, the engine stops and the plane falls out of the sky. This is not the case. Stalling the plane just means that the wing is actually out here, stops getting lift. It doesn't, so it can't keep the plane up as well. And these airplanes that we fly, these small airplanes, I'm not talking about commercial planes, although they work somewhat the same way, but our airplanes want to fly. If you're doing something inappropriate in the plane, it's spinning or turning or doing something it shouldn't do. If you just let go, the airplane will tend to right itself, assuming you have enough altitude to let that happen. So you learn how to do that, and you practice some of those things, and practice turns, steep turns, and so we did all that, and I passed all my tests. I did pass the written test, and I passed the flying test, and I got my license. And that's when I actually learned how to fly. I mean, once you pass all that stuff, you're ready to go. Then you start going out on your own. And it's very intimidating the first time you fly without an instructor sitting next to you to help you in case you do something wrong. So you get past that point where you're in control, it's your plane, and you're confident that you can do this. And so I did this, and I got my license in my late 40s. So I was started kind of late. Louise probably got hers when she was 10, but she'll talk to you about that. But I started a little bit later in life, and my flight instructor Debbie was so helpful to me. And as soon as I got my license, she said, "Okay, on Thursday next week, I want you to come to a meeting with me." I said, "Okay." I was a good student. I obeyed everything she said. I did. And so I went to a meeting with her, and it happened to be a meeting of an organization called the 99s. I don't know if you can see my 99 shirt hanging on the window there. I thought I'd put that up for you. And the 99s is an international organization of women pilots. Now, in this world, there are, in the whole world, there are several thousand women pilots. There are several dozen thousand men pilots. So women are a small portion of the pilot population. Of course, now it's not much more. But when I started, that 30 years ago, it was not such a large group. And when the 99s were formed, this was back in the 1929-30 era, when Amelia Earhart was around, and many of her friends, and there were only about a couple hundred women pilots in the world. And so they were not allowed to participate in some of the activities that the men did, like air racing and some of the other things that they really wanted to do. And so they called a meeting, and 99 women showed up at the first meeting, and that's how they got the name the 99s. That's why we're called the 99s to this day. And they started this organization that then enabled them to create their own air races and fly. And air racing is not just like trying to go faster than the next plane, because every plane, there's so many different kinds of planes with different kinds of engines, and you can't compare, the speed ability. You're generally flying against your own plane. So you have, like, my plane will pretty much go at 124 knots. If I can do this, go from here to there, and average more than 124 knots, I get a positive score, and whoever gets the biggest score wins the race. Okay, so women then started air racing, and then the news media picked up on this, and they called the first race the Powder Puff Derby, because women put powder on their face or something in those days. And so that's how the Powder Puff Derby name came about. And then that got changed in later years to the Air Race Classic, which is what it's called now. And I have flown that race 3 or 4 times, and it's usually across country. Starts on the West Coast and goes to the East Coast. And nowadays they try to vary it a little bit and that, but pretty much the weather dictates that it's best to start on the West Coast and go to the East Coast, because your jet stream pretty much goes in that direction. So you're going to get your best possible flying weather doing that. So I've done that. I've done some other kinds of races, much smaller ones, like just in California, where you go from Santa Monica, Southern California, to Bend, Oregon, over like a 2-day thing. And racing, you know, when you're doing that kind of activity, you're just flying during the day in good weather. So the first thing that I did after I got my license and I joined the 99s, the very next thing I did was I went back into training with my instructor, Debbie Cunningham, and got my instrument rating. That meant that I was qualified to fly with reference only to the instruments in my plane and not looking outside. So if I was in the clouds, you look aside in the clouds, you don't see anything. So you have to be able to fly on your instruments and see that this instrument is showing me that my plane is level, or it's showing me that I'm tipped sideways. So you have to believe what the instrument is telling you, because your brain does not necessarily process where you are when you can't see. If you would like close your eyes and just try and move your head around, you might see that you're not quite sure if you're turned to the right or the left or upside down or whatever. And so that's an important set of training that you get that teaches you how to believe that this instrument is telling you that you're right side up, and this instrument is telling you that you're not in a turn, and this instrument is telling you what your speed is, and that you just fly by looking at those instruments and not any outside references. It's a very interesting concept and thing to do. So I got my instrument rating, and so then I was qualified to fly in any conditions. The air racing that I've done has only been in what we call visual flight rules. That means you can see outside. There's no clouds obscuring anything. You're not flying in clouds. You can see where you're going. And small airplanes like the kind that I fly generally fly below 18,000 feet. So you have my airplane can climb, but when it gets to about 15 or 16,000 feet, I don't get enough lift on the wings of the airplane to make it climb anymore. It'll stay up there, but it won't go any higher. So that's about as high as I ever fly, and that's as high as I need to fly. I've gone to the East Coast and back several times from California. I've gone to Alaska and back, and I've never had to go over 14,000 feet at any point to get over any mountains or anything. I try to go through the lower passes and things like that. So that's pretty much how I fly. Now, some of the other things that I do with my flying, it's not just air racing. I mean, that's once a year, something like that. So I have done a lot of charity flying, and many pilots do. And in fact, you folks, I think, are down in Gilroy, most of you. So you have Hollister Airport there. I've spent a lot of time at Hollister Airport. But when the Loma Prieta earthquake hit in 1989, it was all of the local pilots that went over to Reed Hillview Airport up in Santa Clara and loaded up on goods. You could not get to Watsonville via any roads. There was no way to get there. So we piled up goods in our plane and we flew, materials, food, whatever they needed, to Watsonville for days. We just load and go, come back, load and go, come back. The only way to reach there was to go to the Watsonville airport. So that's some of the kind of flying that I do, charitable flying that I do. I belong to all the organizations I belong to. Angel Flight, which is an organization that offers flights for people who have certain cancers and other diseases and need treatment at UCLA or Stanford. And they live in remote areas and can't get there, or they don't have the funds, or they don't have the means to get there. So we will fly our plane to the nearest airport to their house, pick them up, and fly them to either Stanford or UCLA or wherever they need to go. And pilots do that. It's a donation. We donate our time, our airplane, and the cost. Costs a lot for fuel for an airplane. As you know now, these days, what it costs for gas, that's what we've been routinely paying for gas in our airplanes. So we donate that as a public service. Another organization I belong to was a more recent one, was called DART, which is, I had to write it down to remember it, Disaster Airlift Relief Team. We were flying personal protective equipment, PPEs. We'd go down to San Diego and pick up some masks or respirators or whatever was needed and fly them maybe up north to an Indian reservation where those people have no access to any of that stuff, and do things like that all last year, pretty much during the year. And so that's another kind of charitable flying that can be done that I do. I also belong to EAA, which is called Experimental Aircraft Association. Now, that doesn't mean that the airplanes you fly are experimental. I mean, they are. Some of them are. They're home built, but they're solid. They're real airplanes. They're not just testing it to see if it works, kind of thing. The EAA does a lot of really good work, especially among children, youngsters. We do what we call Eagle flights, where we'll go to any airport that asks us, and a whole bunch of people will come with their airplanes, and we'll give kids their first flight. We just go, up and down the valley and come back and let them experience what it is like to be in an airplane and fly an airplane. And they get to sit in the seat right next to us. So generally, most airplanes have 2 seats. Some of these kind of airplanes have a front seat and a back seat, but our airplanes have side-by-side seats. And so they can sit up in the front there and wear the headset and feel like they're actually flying the plane. And it's a wonderful way to introduce kids to flight and to flying and to help. And the kind of flying that we do, flying these small planes and becoming pilots is a huge source of pilots for the whole rest of the aviation community. The commercial airlines, American Airlines, Delta, all those places, get their pilots from what we are called general aviation. We're not commercial side. We don't charge. Excuse me. We don't charge for our flights. We don't carry passengers for money. We don't do anything for money really. We usually spend the money. But so the general aviation pilots are the training for some of these commercial jobs, and then they pick up general aviation pilots from that group to train to fly the big airliners. So we provide that kind of service to the airlines. I'm trying to get my notes back here. Some interesting things that you might like to know. I'm not sure exactly what you want to know, but you might like to know about flying. Is that it's such a unique thing to do. It's very much revered in the world in some cases and not so much in others. A lot of people think we're just a bunch of rich people who have, nothing better to do, so we go fly around. Now, I do very occasionally fly somewhere for lunch, fly to another airport somewhere else or somewhere I haven't been. And I want to practice like how to land on an airport that's sitting right on the water, how to land on a dirt strip, how to land on an airport with no control tower. Things like that are really good experience for pilots to stay current and stay active. And so a place like some of the Mattel or some of the other companies, they've got a Monopoly game about flying. So there's a way for people to learn all about flying, and that's such an interesting topic that they've even got a game out that appeals to people and they buy it. One of the tools that I use in my flying is called the FARs, the federal aviation regulations. Okay, and the AIM is the Aeronautical Information Manual. This is everything you need to know to fly a plane. Okay, it gives you all the rules, all the training requirements, and a lot of really good information to help you fly your plane safely and better. Right, so most pilots have an FAR, and of course these days everything is online. I'm a paper person. I like to be able to thumb through it. See, I've got all these tabs that I put in there to take me to the different places. For me, it's easier to do that than try and get my computer to come back on all the time. But I do use my computer, and I know that Louise is going to show you some interesting things, some charts and stuff. My computer is, I used to have a big bag full of charts, okay? And now it's all right here. I use this product. There's several of these products around. Mine is called 4Flight. And it is actually the charts, shows you all the landmarks, where all the airports are, what the ground, the terrain is, where the cities are. It lets you navigate. It's a navigation tool. I can use it to get from here to there. It shows me how long it's going to take, how many miles, how much gas I'm going to use, that kind of thing. So I do all of my flying I carry this instead of a paper chart that I used to carry around. Okay, so this is good because I used to have to carry 20 or 30 paper charts, but now I can just carry one iPad. Now, 4Flight isn't the only tool. There are others, but this is the one that I particularly like. It's an app that I like, all right, and that I use for that. And it really helps, and it shows me my track of where I went. Everything really gives me a lot more information than the paper chart ever did. So I tend to use that. Now, I'm going to turn you over to Louise, and she's going to give you a slightly different perspective on flying and the kinds of things that she does. And please feel free to send your questions to Marcy, because we'll be happy to answer any that you have.
There is one question online. Someone asked, would someone get altitude sickness above 12,000 feet in a small plane?
Okay, it depends. Now, I used to be car sick. When I was a kid, my parents couldn't drive around the corner without me getting sick, you know. And so I kind of grew out of that. My son, I have a son, I tried to take him up to Tahoe a couple times. He gets altitude sick just driving on the road. We weren't flying, we were driving. So the altitude, as you go up, there are fewer molecules in the air. Okay, so the air is real heavy down here and it gets lighter as you go up. You may know that already. That's one of the reasons the plane doesn't climb above a certain altitude, because there's not enough air molecules to push up on the wings. So the air gets thinner, and some people have trouble breathing, or, you know, and their stomachs get sick. It's not like getting in an elevator and, you know, it's not that kind of feeling. So that's going to vary with the person. A person who is prone to being, you know, getting like car sick or something like that. I never got sick in the airplane. I did get sick for many years in cars, but I was younger. So I don't know. I don't get sick in cars anymore. But I never felt nauseous flying in the airplane, except one time when it was a really extremely windy, bumpy. There were just all kinds of gusts and things going on, and I was, you know, going like this. And normally, when you're flying in a small plane, you're not doing that. You're pretty even keel. So I would say if you're prone to air sickness, try it out, see what happens. The more stress you feel, the more, you know, anxious and nervous you feel. You tighten up your muscles, and that can create a situation where you could be air sick. All right. So
And for the altitude, honestly, above 10,000 feet, I bring oxygen, and I just use oxygen.
yeah,
Keeps me from getting altitude sickness.
right. And anybody can do that. We carry oxygen in our plane. And generally above 12,500 feet, you're supposed to use oxygen in the plane, I think. But because before I was a pilot, I was a skydiver, and we always jumped out at 12,500 feet because above that we would have to have had oxygen in the plane. So we didn't want to have to carry oxygen. So that's one thing I learned about that, and I never got airsick skydiving. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to share some pictures. Let's see, how do I share screen? And here we go. And let me share this. And I think I can put it in
Oh, good.
presentation mode. Okay, back. Go to the first page. So, Pat told an interesting story. Mine's a little different. I mean, I'm from this area as well. I was born in Santa Clara, and I still live here. I've lived in other places, but came back. I was one of those kids that, when they were little, was always pointing my finger up in the air at the planes. In fact, according to my mom, that was the first word I spoke when I was a year old, avion, which is airplane in French. So I was always interested in airplanes. Went to school, got a degree in engineering, joined the Army. And then after I got a job, I got a degree in aerospace engineering. I had money, so I said, I'm going to go learn to fly. I was 23. And my instructor was 20 years old. He was a student at San Jose State. So I learned to fly at Reed Hill View. And I took my test, my flying test, 2 days after that Loma Prieta earthquake that Pat mentioned. I'll never forget that. And I flew a bit, and then I started having kids, and I didn't fly for a while. And I started, so I don't have a lot of pictures of that time because this is before digital cameras and before phones with cameras. But I started flying again in, 7 years ago now. And so I have some pictures from that. There's my 3 kids from when they were younger. They like to go hiking and camping and stuff. So we used to do that. And I would, randomly go to museums. There's a SR-71, which is a really cool plane. And look at the airplanes at the museums. We actually went to Alaska once. I think it was our 20th wedding anniversary, my husband and I. And we took a flight around Mount Denali. That's Mount Denali or Mount McKinley, you might know of. And we took a flight in a small plane on oxygen because it's above 12,500 feet around the mountain. So that was, I got a little bit of a flying fix there. There's my kids, they're older now. So I could start flying again. And oh, by the way, I'm an aerospace engineer and I work on satellites. So that's one of the satellites I worked on. So I started flying again, and here's a picture of the bay from Palo Alto area. This is when I first started flying again. This is a low wing plane, but I also kept going to air shows. This is from Salinas. I think it's the
Blue Angels, looks like.
I think it was the Thunderbirds there. Yeah.
Thunderbirds, okay.
Yeah, and I joined the Civil Air Patrol. There's one of our planes, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And I would take my family flying. There's my daughter, my youngest daughter. When she was at the university, I flew up to her college and picked her up, and we flew around a little bit and had some lunch, and then I went home and she went back to school. So one of the things I really like about flying is you get the best views. So here's the mountains up by Tahoe. There's Lake Tahoe. It's kind of cool. This is in the valley. Just puffy clouds in the morning. Here it's clear and it's still a little green, but must have been in the springtime before the hillsides dried up. Here's a picture of Civil Air Patrol. So again, I'll go into it a little bit more, but this was a school. The Civil Air Patrol doesn't teach people how to fly, adults how to fly. They do teach young people. But we do teach adults how to do missions. We do search and rescue missions. And so this was a school we were learning how to do some of that. And that was my crew. I'm the short one, in case you wondered. And I kept going to air shows. Here's a picture of the B-1. That was really cool. Here's me checking out a new plane that they were exhibiting at the air show there. I didn't have the money to buy it though. So but it's fun to dream. Here's a picture of the A-10, again, at the air show. They have lots of great air shows around the country. This one was in Wisconsin. They do it every year, except for during the pandemic. They had to cancel it. But it's on for this year, so maybe we'll go back. More pictures from the air show. This is kind of cool. You can see an A-10 in the front, an F-35 in the back, and two P-51s on either side. And if you can imagine it, the P-51s are going as fast as they possibly can, and the F-35 is going about as slow as it possibly can, so they all can stay together. Yeah. So different kinds of planes have different performance, that's for sure. And there's the Blue Angels. Yeah, they were there at that one. So I had to put the obligatory animal picture in here because the building I work with on the 5th floor, there was this what red-tailed hawk would come and visit, on a regular basis. Actually would run into the window and then just sit on the ledge outside the window and then fly off. So I got a picture of it one time. And then around the Bay Area, we have some pretty interesting sites too. This is the San Francisco airport and flying right by it. Here's another view of that San Francisco airport. You don't spend too much time flying past the runways here because you want to get out of the way of those big jets. If I'm not flying, I'll go on a ride in an aircraft. In this case, we went in a helicopter down into the Grand Canyon. So this is the Grand Canyon. So that was a really interesting trip. But I needed to have my own plane. So we bought a plane 4 years ago. There she is in Texas, and we flew it from Texas back to California. And as you can tell, I'm really happy. My very first airplane, all my own. I still have it. And we're using it to fly around the valley and see the site. So this is the Apple building in Cupertino. I don't know if you've ever seen it from the air, but that's what it looks like. Well, that's what it looked like a few years ago. They have more stuff inside it there now. And here's the old radar site on top of Mount Umunhum. That was a good camera that took that picture. And of course, the Golden Gate Bridge. I have lots of Golden Gate Bridge pictures. It's fun to fly by there, and when it's clear and the weather's good, you get some pretty cool pictures. Here's one of Alcatraz. So fly by there too. And then here's another one, Civil Air Patrol. So one of the missions we do is, in this case, we were flying fire watch for the city of Palo Alto. So on the 4th of July, we gave up our holiday to go fly around at sunset and in dusk and look for fires, because sometimes people set off fireworks and they're not careful and they start fires. So we were doing that. We do that every year. And I got to fly my mom. So she came with me. She really liked it. She said, when we landed, she says, "We're done already?" We had gone for about an hour out by the coast. Now, one of the things the Civil Air Patrol does is we have a leadership development program for young people, 12 to 18. And for free, they get to fly an airplane. They get 5 flights. We call them orientation rides. And they get to sit in the front and handle the controls. And we have a whole syllabus to show them how to do stuff. They don't take off or land, but they get the bug, right? They get interested in flying. And so here are 3 young men who I took on an orientation ride one day. Here, this one, he's super happy. It's interesting, you talked about air sickness. This one told me he had got air sick before, and he was totally fine through the whole flight until we landed and we were taxiing on the taxiway, and he literally turned green. I said, "Open the window, look outside, take a sip of water." And he didn't throw up, but he was green for a while there. And here's a picture coming into San Francisco. So little planes don't get to go into the big airports too often. I think San Francisco charges almost like $300 just to land there. So, but United has a family day every year, and they invite private pilots to come and exhibit their plane. So I'm on their list to come and exhibit the CAP plane. And we bring a bunch of cadets there to show them the plane, show people their plane. So here we are coming into San Francisco. There's 2 runways, and there's this big old jet. I think it's Alaska Airlines on the left runway, and we're going to land on the right one. And that was kind of fun. Here we are. We're real small. We're sitting under the wing of the bigger plane, as you can see. And then here's all the cadets who came out to help us share what Civil Air Patrol does with the folks that were visiting that day. They also gave us free barbecue, so that was kind of cool. So I'm a mission pilot for Civil Air Patrol, and this is a picture of the first mission I flew. What do you think that is? So we were doing this flights for the Air Force, or maybe it was the FAA. Anyways, there's an Air Force base north of this location that has a radar facility, and this location has a bunch of windmills. And the radar couldn't tell the difference between little planes and windmills, because windmills are huge. They're bigger than the little planes. And so they were doing some work to improve how the radar worked. So they had us fly these patterns over the windmills and with our transponder off, and they were seeing how well their improvements to the radar were working. So that was really interesting. That was the very first mission I flew for the Civil Air Patrol. There's another mission we fly. You see this pod, this white pod on the strut of the airplane? That's got 2 big cameras in it. And we've used that to fly over the burned areas. So remember when town of Paradise burned at, I think it was the end of 2019. And then we had all the fires in 2020. So there's a couple cameras here, and it's hooked up to a computer in the plane. And we fly a really precise path, and it takes pictures along that path. And then we take those pictures and put them on a computer and stitch them all together, and they get a real-time or almost real-time view of what the burned areas look like. This is another fun thing we do. The Civil Air Patrol has a glider at the Byron Airport, and I got to fly in the glider, and here I am being towed by the CAP plane. There's the tow rope there. You can see the tow rope. The CAP plane tows the glider into the air. The glider doesn't have an engine, so it needs something to get it up into the air, and then lets us go, and or we let the rope go, and then we glide back to the airport. And because the glider has really long wings, it takes a long time. So that's a lot of fun. We do that mostly to share with cadets. There's another mission we do. We act as targets for the F-15. No, they don't actually fire missiles at us, we hope, but they intercept us. So they practice their maneuvers to come up next to a small or slow plane and get a hold of the pilot on the plane and ask them what they're doing and why they're flying in the area, say where the president is located, or where the Super Bowl is happening, or where maybe there's a fire restriction. You're not supposed to fly through an area because of a fire. Anyways, the F-15s and the Air National Guard, that's one of their jobs, to intercept planes and shoo them away, tell them to go away, get out of the area that they're not supposed to be in. So we practice that. And here's some more pictures. That's the actual glider we flew in, and there's 2 of my cadets there who got to ride in the glider, and actually you could see, well, you can't see because of the mask, but she was smiling. I could tell from her eyes. She had a good time. And here we are. These 2 young ladies, I just flew. Oh, this was maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was their very first flight ever in a small plane, and they were having a good time. The one next to me in the front seat, her name is Sergeant Srivatsan, and she's 16 and she's learning how to drive, and got in the plane and looked around and she said, "Is it kind of like driving, but in 3 dimensions?" I'm like, "Yes, exactly like that. Except for the controls are a little different, but we'll go over that." So we did. And then Cadet Chan in the back, we landed at Hollister, and we switched seats, so she got to sit in the front on the way back. So that was fun. And for me, this is the most fun flying you can do, is fly cadets, fly young people on their very first airplane ride, like Pat said with the EAA, Young Eagles, same kind of thing. We see some interesting sights from the air. This is a picture of the Antonov that was the world's largest aircraft. It was at Oakland a few years back. It's since been destroyed by the Russians, unfortunately. It's from Ukraine. It's a big cargo plane. So they were coming there, shipping things there. Here's a picture of the Big Sur coast, that famous bridge along the Highway 1 in Big Sur. This is a flight where we were looking for whales. Remember that, Pat?
Yeah.
We got some pictures of the scenery there. We saw whales too. I don't have those pictures here, but we did see whales. And here's a sunrise coming off of Palo Alto. Got some good there. Oh, I found another SR-71. This one's at the Castle Air Force Base Museum. It's in Merced. It's a public airport now, but they have a museum there, and they have all of these Air Force planes and some Navy planes too, and Army as well. So if you like to see airplanes, I highly recommend going to this museum. It's all outdoors, so it's very, very, very cool. In fact, the SR-71 is in front of the museum. You don't have to pay to go see it. The rest of them you have to pay to go in, but that was an interesting one. Everyone recognized the famous view of Half Dome and El Capitan in Yosemite. Yeah, this is it's a little fuzzy because it's through the window, and the window probably wasn't super clean. Or maybe the camera that was used wasn't the greatest, but that's the kind of neat things you can see when you're flying around California. This one's fuzzy, but that's actually Mount Shasta, and all of that below the little tip of the mountain, that's smoke. It was super smoky a couple of years ago when we were flying PP up to the Oregon for the firefighters up there. And that was one of those charity flights that Pat mentioned. And here's another one. I flew this dog from airport up in the Sierras down to Southern California. He was a rescue, and they're going to train him to be a search dog. So we flew him from his rescue facility down to the search dog school. So that was interesting. He was pretty good. He was in a crate, and he whined a little bit, but he fell asleep pretty much as soon as we took off. And then he slept the whole way, which is about a 3-hour flight. It was a pretty long flight, and woke up just a little bit before we got there. But he was a good dog. We see some other critters at the airport. This is a fox, I think. Is at Livermore. Wow. Just randomly crossing the ramp there, probably looking for rabbits. I was saying, he was lost because all the rabbits are in Palo Alto. And this young lady, really interesting story. She's Belgian and British, I think, but from Belgium. She flew that plane behind us there, all the way from Belgium, around the US, down through South America, back up. She stopped at Palo Alto, and that Palo Alto Tower is behind us there. Just to go. She's wanted to be the youngest woman to fly around the world by herself. Wow. And she's since finished her flight, but it took her a few months. It was a long flight. One thing that Pat mentioned about instrument flying. Now, she doesn't have an instrument rating, so all this had to be done outside the clouds. It had to be clear days, so sometimes she had to wait for the weather to clear. But really, really nice young lady. So, and just to leave you with another view of the bay there, you could see the Golden Gate Bridge off on the right, some of the islands in the bay there. Just great views that we have, around here. You got to try it. And if you are interested in flying, I would recommend go to one of the schools or one of the clubs at Reed Hillview or Palo Alto and ask for a demo flight. And they'll charge you maybe a couple $100 or something. And an instructor will take you up in the plane, and they'll let you handle the controls a little bit. And you can see what it's like for yourself. It's awesome. I'll do this as long as I'm still able. That's for sure.
Me too. And another way to do that is to go to the various airport days. Reed Hillview has an airport day. Palo Alto has an airport day. Watsonville has an airport day. And they generally offer first flights there for a reasonable price. And that's a good way to get introduced to some of this amazing scenery that we get to see and amazing things that we get to do with our airplanes.
Okay. I'm going to try to stop sharing. I'm not sure how to do that.
Yeah, you should have a stop share.
Here it is. I see it. Okay. I found it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. All right.
So, Marcy, are there questions for us?
There aren't, but let's encourage people to ask questions. And One thing I was wondering is, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
We heard the introductory flight was a couple $100s, and
Yeah.
I took lessons 40 years ago, didn't complete, but
Yeah.
I know it was $1,000
Right.
then. And what is it now? What could we expect?
Let me address that then. Okay. It is very expensive to fly. And particularly now with the gas situation the way it is, if I fuel my plane will carry 40 gallons of fuel. If I fill it up at San Jose International, it will cost me around $7 a gallon. If I fill it up in Tracy, it'll cost me around $5 a gallon. So it just depends on where you go, what it costs to fill it up. That's the expense of flying, is the fuel. Buying an airplane can be expensive. Renting an airplane can be expensive. So you have to do the math to see the trade-off for yourself. How often do you fly? I was flying often enough, it made sense to buy a plane and not rent it. The other thing was, when I was renting, the plane that I wanted wouldn't always be available when I wanted it. And you have to work yourself into their system. So it was much more convenient. Now I own a plane that looks very much like the one that Louise showed you that she owns, with 3 other women. So 4 women own this plane. And really only 2 of us do most of the flying. The other 2 women hardly ever fly at all, but I'm very happy to have them pay the rent and everything. They want to own the plane. So what does it cost? It'll cost you a few $1,000s to get your training, okay? It'll cost you, of course, when I did it, maybe it's like more like 4,000 or 5,000 these days, I'm not sure. And it'll take maybe about a year to get trained and everything. And it'll cost you anywhere from, now Louise, you're probably better at the rental rates than I am, maybe 200 to more.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you learn to fly in a 152, which is what I did, those can be rented for about $125 an hour.
Yeah.
But you also have to pay the instructor. So
right. You have to pay
one of the great things for kids is similar to 12 to 18. We have a flight training program. They learn in the cap aircraft at cost, which is about half of renting from a school, and the instructors are free. So It's a really good deal.
And the other thing is the benefit of the 99s, joining the 99s and other organizations like that, the EAA and that, we offer scholarships. The 99s will offer scholarships that'll pay for your entire training. And so we encourage people to apply for scholarships. The 99s has a fund that we set up many, many years ago that's got $1 million in it that we can use to help people learn how to fly. Women, for the 99s, it's for women, but many organizations offer scholarships for anybody. This is a way to encourage people to get trained. Once you get trained, then you start either renting or you buy a plane, and then fuel is your main cost. Your airplane has to be inspected once a year annually by a qualified mechanic. The FAA requires that. My plane just came out of annual inspection last week. So, they go over everything and take it all apart and make sure everything is working and put it all back together. And they do that once a year. So,
yeah, mine did too last week.
Oh, well. And that'll cost, it depends on what they find. I've had annuals that cost $10,000. I've had annuals that have cost $2,000. So, it just depends on what they find that they need to fix. But in any case, it keeps you very safe and keeps your plane flying. And it's required by the FAA. That mechanic can ground your plane if it's not airworthy. So that's a good thing safety-wise.
So we have a couple of questions here. One is, how far can you get on 40 gallons of fuel?
Yeah, I can go, okay, how far can my plane get and how far can I get? Okay, so I stop every 2 hours because that's how far I can go. But my plane could go, I can get from here to Phoenix on 1 tank of gas. I don't, because I don't like to let it go below half a tank ever. I like to always have a big reserve. You never know when you're going to find a big headwind, or your controller is going to have you circle around to avoid some big guy who's coming in or something. There's all kinds of reasons why you might not make the timing that you think. So this is one rule number one about flying your own small little plane. You don't ever have to be there wherever you're going. You can wait a day. You can go another time. You can stop before you get there. You don't ever have to be there because you never know what kind of thing. So the safety is number one in my estimation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I fly safely. So I can go from here to Phoenix. I can go from here to Portland, but I always stop halfway and get more fuel. And
my limit is about 4 hours. But
use the bathroom. Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond that, it's not very comfortable.
Yeah. My husband can't go more than 2 hours either. So it works for, he's not a pilot. So I have to stop for him sometimes.
Somebody asked how many flight hours to get your first license. So
that'll vary by person.
It really does. Yeah. So when I did it 30 something years ago, the minimum was 40 hours, 20 with an instructor and 20 solo.
Right.
And I was able to do it in 43. Your instructor has to sign off on you ready to take the test. So they're not going to let you go take the test just because you had 40 hours. You have to be ready.
Right.
So I did it in 43, but I did it because that fast because I did it over 7 weeks. I flew 3-4 times a week. And so it was the immediacy of remembering what I had just done and not forgetting things because it's been 2 weeks since I flew. I think the national average is 60 to 70 hours.
Yeah, and your experience is not the normal. Mine was more like it. It took me a year because I remember I started in November and I couldn't fly anywhere for a long time, so I just learned how to take off and land for a long time, and then and it took me about 75 hours to get my license. So I was only flying once a week. So it just really
takes longer,
on your situation and your finances and everything. It's great to go to a flight school like Embry-Riddle or one of those places and just get it done in a couple months and go through all that. But not everybody can afford to do that, and certainly I couldn't afford to do that. So it took me a year, but I got my license and everything, and it took me another year to get my instrument rating done. It's another rating that you have to get in order to be qualified to fly on instruments. And I go out now one of my plane partners, and I go out every 2 weeks and fly, and every other flight we practice our instrument approaches so that we always stay current. That there are some requirements for how many you have to practice in a certain amount of time, but we're always above that. We always stay current, and we always stay what we consider safe. We're current and we're safe. We know what we're doing. Where you can be current, but you can be legally current, but not really safe. Just varies from person to person. I hope that answers the question.
I had a question. Have either of you had any emergencies or near misses or any kind of situation that you had to deal with?
You would be amazed at how big the sky is. When I've done some air racing, 50 planes take off from Santa Monica within a half hour and fly to Santa Rosa or someplace, and you don't see another plane the whole way. It's amazing how big the sky is. That said, I've never had a real emergency. I had one time when my engine was sputtering a little bit, and I had to play around with one of the controls, and so I was over Calaveras. I called Livermore and I said I'd like to come and land. It's not an emergency, but I think I'm having a little problem. I want to come and land. So they cleared the airways so that I could come and land in front of other people. And then I had to call the tower and talk to them about it. But it wasn't an emergency, where I was in any real danger. And so I have not had any really close calls and I've got 2,200 hours of flying. Never been like so scared that I thought I was going to die or anything like that. I've never had my engine die on me. And my engine, it has two magnetos, I guess. So you could fly on one. You've got two sets of spark plugs, two everything. I had one time when one set went out, but I could still fly, and I was able to. I had one time when my electricity went out, but several of your instruments are not electric driven. They're gyro driven, and so you can still fly, but you want to land as soon as possible and get it fixed. That's all. But it doesn't prevent the airplane from flying. Airplanes are very, very cool things. I mean, they just glide around. They're pretty good. Sorry, Louise, how about you? Have you had any exciting experiences?
I had a couple of situations. One, we lost the alternator, which means the battery's no longer being charged, and so we told ATC, and we went back to an airport to where they could fix it. So that was good. The battery still worked even after we landed. It was still working. We hadn't discharged it all the way, but that's something you need to fix. And the other time I had a fuel pump that was starting to go bad. I wasn't really sure what it was, but it didn't sound good. So I said, okay, we're going to go land at the nearest airport. And we did. And it was a good thing, because if we hadn't landed, it probably would have ruined the engine.
That's a good point, because the airplanes come in. She flies, or she used to fly a low wing airplane. And in low wing airplanes, you have a fuel pump that helps the fuel get into the engine. I fly a high wing airplane, which is gravity driven. The fuel flows in from the top and gets in that way. It doesn't need a fuel pump. Actually,
it does. At least the 182 Tango that I have does. It has two fuel pumps. One is the boost pump, and the other is engine driven. And it was the engine driven one that went out. So
interesting. Yeah. So we don't have the fuel pump in our plane. See, so we both fly Cessna 182s, and they're different configurations.
Yeah, mine's a 2005, so it's a little newer.
Oh, you got a new one. Yeah, mine's a 1978. So I fly an old plane. My previous plane was a 1967 Cessna 182. That was a really old plane. So a lot of these planes were built back in the 60s and the 70s. And then some of that, all those people got sued. Some of the deep pocket suits came in, and the aviation industry stopped building small planes for about 10 years, I guess, 8 or 10 years. And then they started again in the 90s, and now then they started using carbon fiber and all kinds of new electronics and stuff. And so those planes are very different. My old plane, the one I had before this, did end up with some deterioration of the wing surface, and that's why I got rid of it and got a new plane. We junked that old plane because the metal fatigue because it was a 1967 plane. It was pretty old. But I mean, I didn't have an accident or anything to stop flying with it. It just that when we took it in for its annual, they said, "This isn't looking good. You got a lot of metal fatigue." So we said, "Okay, we're not going to fly that plane anymore." Then
there are a couple more questions.
Yeah.
One, is there lower and upper age limits for getting a license?
I think you have to be 16 with your parents' permission, and is that right? Or 18?
16 to solo and 17 to get your license. And there are plenty of students who go out there and they want to solo on their 16th birthday and take their flying test on their 17th birthday. And more power to them if their parents can afford it. That's for sure, right? Yeah. Gliders 14. You can fly glider at 14.
Yeah, no engine.
No engine, that's true.
Yeah, I've gone up for glider lessons, and that's really fun. But different. It's
less expensive than flying airplanes too.
Yeah. Well, and you can't go as far. I mean, depending on the wind. I mean, you get a good updraft and some winds, you can go a couple 100 miles on a glider.
That is true. Yeah.
But generally, you don't go very far. Yeah. And you need a ground crew. You can't. Like my airplane, I can land if I have to land in a field or something like that. I might be able to get, probably try and land on a road or something if I had to land in an emergency. But and it's still fly, but a glider, you have to like put it on a truck and take it somewhere and get it pulled up again into the air or something.
Yeah.
To get it anywhere. So there's just they're different. And there's I've taken float plane lessons because I'm afraid of the water. And I was flying to Alaska and it's all water there. And I've always been afraid of water. I don't like to swim. I'm not a water person at all. And so I thought I'd better take float plane lessons to teach me how to deal with the water in case I ever have to. So I took float plane lessons to learn how to see the water and which ways, because you don't have a runway. The reason you have runways, well, it's paved for one thing, but they're generally pointed so that you land into the wind. You want the wind pushing you when you land so that you get that lift and drop that you need. And it's if you have the wind behind you, it's really hard to land on the runway and not go past it. You want the wind to help stop you. So on the water, you don't have a runway. You don't know which way, so you have to learn how to see which way the wind is going on the water and how to land your plane on the water that way. That was interesting for me, but who is deathly afraid of water. But I did it, and I'm glad I did, because then I flew all around Alaska and never had to land on the water.
The other question is, do scholarships have an age limit?
Not usually. It's a thing limit. Are you trying to get a private pilot's license? Here's a scholarship for that. Are you trying to get an instrument rating? Here's a scholarship for that. So if they assume that if you have a license or you're getting a license, you're the right age. You have to be 16. You're the right age to. You have to take just for general flying. You have to have a physical examination every 2 years and pass that. And that allows you to apply for a license if you pass the physical. And then every 2 years after that, you get rechecked by an aviation medical doctor. And if you don't pass your physical, then that prevents you from being legal to fly. You still have your pilot's license and you're still a pilot, but you're not legally allowed to be the pilot in command in an airplane.
You can go along as a passenger though.
Right. You can go, yeah. Yeah. So any other questions?
That's all the questions, and we are coming up to an hour, or just a little past an hour. We really appreciate hearing both of your perspectives on flying and learning about the organization. And if we have any people who are interested, they know now how to go about learning how to fly.
Yeah, let me leave you with 99s.org, NINETY-NINES.org. Go there, you'll get tons of information.
And if you're interested in Civil Air Patrol, it's gocivilairpatrol.com. That's our national website.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It was such a delightful evening. And again, this was recorded. So then in a couple of days, I'll be sending the link to our YouTube page so that you can view it again if you like, or recommend your friends to. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.